On July 18, 1992, one of the darkest chapters of Peru's internal conflict unfolded at La Cantuta University in Lima. What began as a normal day would end in tragedy, exposing state violence at its most brutal. La Cantuta was a public university with a reputation for progressive education, located just outside Lima. It was pre-dawn, around 2 a.m., under the cover of darkness. 30 soldiers from Grupo Colina surrounded the campus. These were elite Army Intelligence Service soldiers, operating under direct orders from the highest levels of government. Inside the residences, 9 students and 1 professor had been marked for death. The soldiers burst in without warning. Students were dragged from their beds, beaten, and forced to lie face down while soldiers searched for specific targets. The victims were Professor Hugo Muñoz Sanchez, age 47, and 9 young students. Their names would become symbols of state terror. Despite witnesses, no one could stop it. The victims were dragged away into the night, screaming for help. When families arrived seeking answers, the military denied everything. They claimed the 10 had disappeared themselves, but the families knew better. Their loved ones had been taken by the state and never seen again. The military and government stonewalled every request for months, claiming they had no information. The case became a symbol of thousands of other forced disappearances during Peru's internal conflict. In April 1993, a group of military officers calling themselves Sleeping Lion anonymously released a document revealing the truth. The document included a detailed map showing where the victims' bodies had been buried in Chenegular. Journalist Mariela Barreto leaked the map. Reporters ventured to the hill area outside Lima to investigate. In July 1993, forensic teams arrived at the clandestine site. What they found would shock the world. 10 bodies were found, showing clear signs of torture and execution-style killings. All had been shot in the back of the neck. Their bodies had been hastily buried, burned, and reburied in an attempt to destroy the evidence. In 1994, 11 members of Grupo Colina were convicted. For the first time, military personnel were held accountable. But in 1995, the Fujimori government passed an amnesty law. All those convicted were immediately released. In 1997, Mariela Barreto, the journalist who broke the story, was found murdered. It was a clear message to dissenters. Journalist Leonor La Rosa appeared on TV from a hospital bed, revealing the military's plans to intimidate opposition. Vladimiro Montesinos, Fujimori's intelligence chief, was running a massive operation of corruption and human rights abuses. In 2000, Fujimori fled Peru. He was eventually extradited and faced trial for crimes against humanity. In 2009, a court made history. Alberto Fujimori was sentenced to 25 years for the La Cantuta massacre. Today, La Cantuta University stands as a memorial to those 10 victims. Their names are remembered, their story taught. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission documented over 69,000 deaths or disappearances during the conflict. The La Cantuta case became a landmark in international human rights law, influencing courts worldwide. Every July 18th, families and students gather at La Cantuta to remember. They keep the memory alive. For younger generations, La Cantuta is a lesson about democracy and the dangers of state violence. It reminds us that even democracies can commit atrocities in the name of security. Justice was long delayed, but not denied. It took 17 years from that dark night to the final convictions. Peru has made significant progress. Democratic institutions have been strengthened and truth is finally being acknowledged. La Cantuta serves as a pilgrimage site for human rights advocates from around the world today. The state was responsible for the violations. The investigation was systematically obstructed. Truth and Reconciliation Commission. The massacre represents the worst of what happens when security concerns override human rights. For the families, justice came too late, but their struggle ensured that the truth would eventually emerge. La Cantuta teaches us that even in the darkest times, courage can prevail, truth has power. Journalists continued investigating despite threats. Families never stopped searching for their loved ones. The La Cantuta Massacre is more than history. It's a living testament to the price of human rights. In 2001, the Supreme Court issued an arrest warrant. In 2009, Fujimori was finally sentenced for crimes against humanity. Every year, the memorial ceremonies continue. New generations learn the story of those 10 lives. The names of the victims are spoken aloud, ensuring they will never be forgotten. Justice, however delayed, eventually prevails. November 3, 1991, a date etched in the memory of Peru, marking one of its darkest chapters, the Barrios Altos Massacre. In the heart of Lima, the capital, a tragedy was brewing that would eventually change the course of human rights history forever. Peru in the early 90s was a nation on the brink, struggling with hyperinflation, economic hardship, and deep social unrest. The election of Alberto Fujimori in 1990 promised a new era of security, but the methods used would soon come under scrutiny. The state was locked in a brutal conflict with the Shining Path, a Maoist insurgent group responsible for waves of terror across the country. Led by Abimael Guzman, the insurgency aimed to topple the government through violence, creating a climate of constant fear and suspicion. Propaganda filled the streets as the line between combatants and civilians became increasingly blurred in the eyes of the military. Barrios Altos was a traditional, working-class neighborhood in Lima, where community ties were strong despite the surrounding chaos. On this specific night, life at 840 Giron Huanta seemed normal, centered around a simple community gathering. Neighbors had organized a chicken pilata, a fundraiser to repair the building's plumbing, filled with music and shared hope. Men, women, and even children were present. It was a scene of domestic peace, far removed from the war zones in the highlands. As the clock approached 11:30 p.m., the neighborhood was quiet. No one could have predicted the horror about to unfold. Suddenly, too dark, unmarked vehicles pulled up to the curb. They moved with a chilling, synchronized precision. For a moment, police lights flickered, a sign usually meant to offer protection, but here, it was the prelude to an execution. 6 armed men emerged. They were members of Grupo Colina, a secret military death squad operating under the guise of counter-terrorism. Equipped with submachine guns and silenced weapons, they were not there to make arrests. Their mission was much more definitive. Inside, the laughter continued. The victims had no idea that their lives were about to be stolen in a matter of seconds. The front door was kicked open with violent force, shattering the peace and the community's sense of safety. Without warning or hesitation, the men opened fire. Muzzle flashes illuminated the terrified faces of innocent civilians. Panic erupted as people scrambled for cover, but in the confined space, there was nowhere to hide from the hail of bullets. Among the fallen was young Javier Rios, only 8 years old. He had run to his father for protection when the shooting began. His mother, Rosa Rios, witnessed the unthinkable. In that moment, her life was fractured by a grief no parent should ever know. When the firing stopped, 15 people lay dead. A heavy, suffocating silence returned to the room, broken only by the smell of gunpowder. The assassins didn't linger, they sped away into the night, disappearing into the labyrinth of Lima's dark streets. Minutes later, the real police and first responders arrived, their sirens wailing in a neighborhood now transformed by tragedy. Paramedics worked desperately to help the 4 survivors, whose lives would be permanently altered by their injuries. Investigators found a scene of total devastation. The walls were riddled with bullet holes, mute witnesses to the massacre. Spent shell casings of various calibers were scattered across the floor, providing the first clues of a professional military operation. At the morgue, the grim task of identification began. It was quickly confirmed none of the victims were members of the Shining Path. Families gathered in mourning, their cries echoing through the sterile halls. They demanded to know why their loved ones were targeted. The news hit the front pages the next morning. The nation was shocked by the brutality of an attack in the heart of the city. The building at Giron Huanta became a site of collective shock and pilgrimage for a community seeking answers. A massive funeral procession followed. 15 coffins were carried through the streets of Lima, a somber protest against the violence. As the investigation stalled, whispers of a secret group within the army, Grupo Colina, began to surface in the press. Army Major Santiago Martin Rivas was identified as a key leader. The massacre wasn't a random act, it was a calculated strike. The trail of responsibility led higher, toward Vladimiro Montesinos, the powerful and shadowy chief of intelligence. President Fujimori himself was implicated. The government initially denied any involvement, calling it a terrorist infighting incident. But top-secret documents revealed a different story. The operation had been planned at the highest levels of military intelligence. The intelligence had been fatally flawed. They believed a Shining Path meeting was happening on the first floor. In reality, the meeting was on the floor above. The commandos had attacked the wrong people, killing innocent civilians by mistake. Instead of seeking justice, the administration moved to protect the killers, rewarding the members of Grupo Colina. In 1995, the Peruvian Congress passed a controversial amnesty law, shielding military personnel from prosecution for human rights abuses. It became known as the Barrios Altos Law. For years, it seemed that the path to justice had been permanently blocked. But some refused to stay silent. Judge Antonius Sacquicure made history by being the first to challenge the amnesty's legality. The case eventually reached the Inter-American Court of Human Rights, which ruled that amnesty for such crimes was invalid. The ruling forced the Peruvian state to pay reparations to the victims' families, though money could never replace what was lost. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission began its work in 2001, documenting the full scale of the tragedy for the historical record. As the century turned, the political landscape shifted. In 2000, Fujimori's government collapsed, and he fled the country. After years in Japan and Chile, Fujimori was finally extradited to Peru to face trial for his role in the massacre. In a historic verdict, the former president was sentenced to 25 years in prison for crimes against humanity. Vladimiro Montesinos and other key members of the intelligence apparatus were also brought to justice, one by one. Santiago Martin Rivas, the leader of Grupo Colina, was finally held accountable for the orders he gave that fateful night. For Rosa Rios and the other families, it was the end of a long, painful crusade for the truth. Today, a memorial plaque at 840 Giron Huanta honors those who were lost, ensuring their names are never forgotten. The building stands renovated, a peaceful part of the neighborhood again, but it carries the weight of history in its walls. Students often visit the site to learn about the importance of human rights and the dangers of unchecked state power. The Barrios Altos Massacre was one of many tragedies in a conflict that claimed nearly 70,000 lives over 2 decades. Each name represents a family, a community, and a future that was cut short by violence from all sides. The international community played a vital role in keeping the pressure on the government to uphold justice. Peru has since transitioned into a more stable democracy, though the scars of the past remain visible in its political discourse. Justice came late, but not too late, Rosa Rios once said. Her words serve as a beacon for other victims worldwide. The Peruvian flag flies over the palace of government, a symbol of a nation that continues to strive for a more just future. The youth of Peru are the guardians of this memory, ensuring that the mistakes of the past are never repeated. In the Lugar de la Memoria Museum, the scrolling names of the victims serve as a permanent reminder of the cost of conflict. Modern Lima is a city of contrast and resilience, looking toward the horizon while remembering the lessons of its history. Accountability is the foundation of any lasting peace. The Barrios Altos case proved that no one is above the law. The story is now taught in schools, part of a national curriculum designed to foster empathy and civic responsibility. Every year on November 3rd, people gather at the site to lay flowers and hold a vigil for the 15 souls. The inscription on the memorial says it best, Nunca más, Never again will the state turn its weapons on its own people. This is the legacy of Barrios Altos, a victory for human rights in a region that has long struggled to find it. The march toward justice continues, fueled by the memory of those who fell and the courage of those who survived. 15 lives were lost that night, but through their sacrifice, a new standard for accountability was born. Thank you for joining us in remembering this vital piece of history. May we always work toward a world without violence. Subscribe for more documentaries on the events that shaped our world and the stories of those who fought for justice. We leave you with the image of a nation that, despite its challenges, remains united in its pursuit of peace. Lest we forget, join the memorial service on November 3rd.